The sun blazed across the dusty horizon of Promise Creek as Penelope Winters clutched her father's letter, her eyes scanning the words that would forever change the course of her life. At 22, she had never imagined returning to this forgotten corner of Wyoming Territory, not after 5 years away at her aunt's finishing school in Boston. But her father's sudden death had left the family ranch vulnerable to land grabbers, forcing her to abandon her dreams of teaching and return to the untamed wilderness she once called home. The stagecoach jolted violently as it hit another rut in the road, sending Penelope lurching forward against her valise. The year was 1875, and the journey west had been as grueling as she remembered. Her traveling companions, an elderly missionary couple and a tight-lipped businessman, had long since given up on conversation, each lost in their own thoughts as the coach rattled through the rugged landscape. Promise Creek Station. 10-minute stop. The driver called out, his voice carrying over the sound of creaking wood and stamping horses. Penelope smoothed her navy traveling dress, once fashionable in Boston but already gathering dust from the journey. As the coach rolled to a stop, she peered through the window, half expecting to see her father's weathered face among the small crowd gathering near the station. Instead, her heart nearly stopped at the sight of a tall figure leaning against the hitching post. Owen Wallace. The boy she'd left behind had become a man. His broad shoulders filled out a worn leather vest, and the shadow of a beard darkened his jawline. The boyish grin she remembered had been replaced by a solemn expression that lifted only when their eyes met through the dusty glass. "Last chance for water and necessities before we continue on to Silverton," the driver announced, opening the coach door. Penelope descended carefully, her legs stiff from the long journey. She stood uncertainly, clutching her small handbag as Owen pushed away from the post and approached her, his stride confident but unhurried. "Miss Winters," he said, removing his hat. The Wyoming sun had streaked his dark hair with gold, and those same intense blue eyes she remembered from childhood studied her face. "Your father's lawyer telegraphed that you'd be arriving today." "Mr. Wallace," she replied formally, though her heart raced at the proximity of the man she'd once known so well. "I hadn't expected a welcoming committee." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Hardly a committee, just me." An awkward silence fell between them, 5 years of distance and unspoken words creating a chasm neither knew how to bridge. "I'm sorry about your father," Owen said finally. "John was a good man." Penelope swallowed hard against the sudden lump in her throat. "Thank you." The telegram didn't say much about what happened. Hart gave out while he was mending fences on the North Ridge. Owen's voice was gentle. "He didn't suffer long. I found him and brought him home." The kindness in his words threatened to crack her carefully maintained composure. "I appreciate that," she managed. "And the ranch, managing as best we can. Your father's foreman, Miguel, has kept things running, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Owen glanced around, lowering his voice. "Victor Harrington's been making offers on your land since before your father passed. Now he's getting more insistent." Penelope's spine stiffened at the familiar name. Victor Harrington owned the largest cattle operation in the territory and had been trying to absorb her father's land for years. "Well, Mr. Harrington will find I'm not as easily intimidated as he might hope," she said, lifting her chin. Something that might have been admiration flickered in Owen's eyes. "Your father said the same thing many times." He glanced at the stagecoach driver who was checking his pocket watch impatiently. "Are you continuing on to Silverton?" "No, I'm disembarking here. The ranch is my destination." Owen nodded. "I brought an extra horse for your things." He gestured to where 2 horses waited, one a sturdy bay and the other a gentle-looking palomino. "Unless you'd prefer to wait for the local transport wagon tomorrow. I've been traveling for over a week, Mr. Wallace." "Another few hours won't make much difference," Penelope replied, grateful for his foresight even as she wondered why he'd come personally to meet her. Owen signaled to the driver about her luggage while Penelope said hasty goodbyes to her traveling companions. Within minutes, her trunk and valises were secured to Owen's pack horse, and he was helping her mount the palomino. As they rode away from the station, Penelope studied Owen's profile from the corner of her eye. They had grown up together, their families' ranches neighboring each other across Promise Creek. Owen had been her dearest friend until she'd left for Boston, until that day by the creek when everything had changed between them. "Your father kept your room just as you left it," Owen said, breaking into her thoughts. "Said you'd be back someday." "He never visited me in Boston," Penelope replied, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "Not once in 5 years. John wasn't one for cities or trains." Owen adjusted his hat against the sun. "But he read every letter you sent, twice, usually." The revelation sent a pang through her heart. He never mentioned that in his replies. Some things are harder to write than say. Owen's gaze remained fixed on the trail ahead. "Speaking of which, there's something you should know before we reach your ranch." Penelope tensed, preparing herself for more bad news. "What is it?" "After your father died, Miguel and the hands stayed on as long as they could, but without payment." He hesitated. "Most have moved on to other work. The ranch has been operating with minimal help for almost 2 months now. But the lawyer assured me there were funds. There are. But with no one authorized to access them until you arrived, hands couldn't be paid." Owen looked genuinely regretful. "I've been riding over when I can to help keep things going, but between my own ranch and yours." Penelope's mind raced, calculating the enormity of what she faced. "How many cattle are left?" "About 300 head. We moved them to the south pasture where the water's better and they're easier to watch. Me and the 2 hands who stayed on Josiah and young Billy. They're good men. Loyal to your father." Penelope bit her lip, overwhelmed by gratitude and concern. "I can't ask you to keep dividing your time, Owen. Your own ranch is doing fine," he interrupted firmly. "My foreman's reliable and I've got enough hands. Besides," his voice softened, "I made a promise to your father." Before she could ask what promise, they crested a hill, and Penelope caught her first glimpse of the Winters ranch in the valley below. The 2-story ranch house stood weathered but proud against the backdrop of distant mountains. Smaller outbuildings dotted the property, the bunkhouse, barn, and storehouses, while beyond them stretched the vast grasslands where cattle grazed. Home. Despite everything, her heart recognized it instantly. "It looks smaller than I remember," she murmured. "Everything does when you come back," Owen replied, and something in his tone made her wonder if he was speaking of more than just the ranch. As they approached, a lanky young man raced from the barn to meet them, his freckled face breaking into a wide smile. "Miss Winters." "We didn't expect you till tomorrow, Billy," Owen acknowledged with a nod. "Where's Josiah?" "Checking fences on the east side. Should be back by sundown." Billy reached up to help Penelope dismount, his enthusiasm palpable. "Your pa would be right pleased you're home, Miss Winters." Penelope allowed him to assist her down, her legs unsteady from the long ride. "Thank you, Billy, and please call me Penelope. We were acquainted before I left, if I recall. You worked summers for my father while attending school." Billy's cheeks reddened. "Yes, madam, I mean Miss Penelope." "That was me, grown some since then." "Indeed you have." She turned to find Owen already unloading her luggage from the pack horse. "Please let me help with that." "I've got it," he insisted, lifting her trunk with ease. "Billy, see to the horses, would you?" As Billy led the animals toward the barn, Owen carried Penelope's trunk toward the house. She hurried ahead to open the door, then stopped on the threshold, momentarily overwhelmed by memories. The familiar scent of pine furniture, polish, and leather, the creaking floorboard just inside the door, the way afternoon light slanted through the kitchen windows. It was as if time had stood still inside these walls. "Your father kept everything just so," Owen said quietly, setting down her trunk in the entryway. "Said you'd notice if anything was changed." Penelope ran her fingers along the carved edge of her mother's sewing table, remembering how her father had maintained it meticulously after her death. He was right. She turned to face Owen. "Thank you for watching over things. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. No need." He shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. "I should get back to my place before dark. Billy and Josiah will help you get settled. I'll ride over tomorrow and we can discuss what needs doing around here." As he turned to leave, Penelope found herself reluctant to see him go. "Owen," she called, stopping him at the door. "The promise you made to my father, what was it?" He paused, his back to her for a long moment before he turned. "To make sure you had a home to come back to," he said simply. Then he was gone, his boots thumping down the porch steps. Penelope stood in the quiet house, listening until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. She wandered into her father's study, where his reading glasses still lay atop an open ledger, as if he'd merely stepped out for a moment. The magnitude of her loss hit her anew, and she sank into his chair, allowing herself, at last, to weep. The following morning dawned bright and clear. Penelope rose early, exchanging her Boston attire for one of her old riding skirts and a practical blouse she'd found still hanging in her wardrobe. After a simple breakfast prepared with supplies Billy had thoughtfully brought from town, she set out to reacquaint herself with the ranch. The barn was her first stop, where she found Josiah, a weathered man in his 50s who had worked for her father since before she was born. His leathery face creased into a smile when he saw her. "Miss Penny," he said, using the childhood nickname she hadn't heard in years. "Good to have you home." "Josiah," she embraced him warmly. "I can't thank you enough for staying. Your pa was good to me, couldn't leave his place to strangers." He hesitated. "Miss Penny, there's something you should know. Harrington's men have been riding our boundaries like they're measuring what they plan to take." Owen mentioned Harrington was interested in buying. Josiah snorted. "Buying is one way to put it. Pushing is another. He's dammed up part of the creek that feeds your north pasture. Says it's on his property, but your pa always maintained that stretch belonged to Winters' land." Penelope frowned. "Do we have maps, surveys? In your pa's study, I reckon, but it might not matter much what paper says out here." Josiah's expression was grave. "Harrington's got money and men. We've got heart, but that don't feed cattle when the water's gone." "We'll figure something out," Penelope assured him, with more confidence than she felt. "I didn't come all this way to give up my father's legacy without a fight." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the barn door, Penelope saw Owen riding in, accompanied by a wagon driven by a dark-haired woman. "That'll be Owen and his sister Olivia," Josiah explained. "She's been bringing supplies since your pa passed. Good woman." Penelope stepped out into the sunlight as the visitors arrived. Owen dismounted smoothly while Olivia set the brake on her wagon. She was a handsome woman of about 30, with the same striking blue eyes as her brother but a more open expression. "Penelope Winters, as I live and breathe," Olivia called out, jumping down from the wagon with surprising agility. "Last time I saw you, you were heading east with your hair in braids and your nose in a book." Penelope smiled, remembering the older girl who had sometimes joined her and Owen on their adventures. "Olivia, it's wonderful to see you. Brought you some proper supplies." Olivia said, gesturing to her loaded wagon. Figured that Boston education might not have covered smoking a ham or preserving peaches. You figured correctly, Penelope admitted with a laugh. Owen watched their reunion with a half-smile before addressing Josiah. Any sign of Harrington's men this morning? Not yet, but they'll be around, Josiah replied grimly, like flies to honey. While Olivia began unloading supplies, Owen turned to Penelope. I need to show you something. Can you ride out with me? His serious tone alarmed her. Is something wrong with the cattle? No, it's about the water situation. Best you see it yourself. After helping transfer the supplies to the kitchen, Penelope saddled the Palomino mare with Josiah's assistance. She and Owen rode north, following the meandering line of Promise Creek through the property. The late June sun beat down on them as they traveled, the landscape growing more rugged as they approached the foothills. Your father named it Promise Creek because he said it never broke its word, Owen explained as they rode. Even in the driest summers, it kept flowing when other water sources dried up. I remember, Penelope said softly. We used to play here as children. Owen nodded, his expression momentarily distant. Over there, he said, pointing to where the creek narrowed between two rocky outcroppings. That's where we need to go. They dismounted and walked the last 100 yards, the sound of rushing water growing louder as they approached. Rounding a bend, Penelope stopped short. A crude dam of logs, rocks, and packed earth had been constructed across the creek, diverting most of the water into a newly dug channel that led toward Harrington land. This is recent, Owen explained, crouching to examine the structure. Wasn't here 3 days ago when I rode through. Penelope felt anger rising in her chest. He has no right. The boundary line has always been disputed here, Owen said, standing. Your father claimed the creek and 50 yards beyond as Winters' land. Harrington says the line runs down the middle of the creek bed, and without my father here to dispute it. Penelope understood the implications all too clearly. Exactly. Harrington's pushing now because he thinks you'll sell rather than fight. Owen's expression hardened. He's always wanted to connect his north and south holdings, and your ranch sits right between them. Penelope walked along the edge of the dam, assessing it. If we removed this, how quickly could Harrington rebuild it? Owen's eyebrows rose slightly. You're thinking of tearing it down. I'm thinking it's on my property and interfering with my water supply, she replied evenly. A slow smile spread across Owen's face. It would take them at least a day to rebuild, maybe longer if they didn't notice right away. Penelope nodded decisively. Then we remove it tonight. But first, I want to check my father's papers for any documentation of the boundary. As they remounted their horses, Owen studied her with newfound respect. You've changed, Penny. The old nickname, spoken in his deep voice, sent an unexpected warmth through her. Boston wasn't always kind. I learned to stand my ground or be trampled. I'm glad, he said simply. Then, after a pause, there's somewhere else I'd like to show you while we're out, if you have time. Curiosity piqued, Penelope nodded. Lead the way. Owen guided them further along the creek, following its winding path through a small copse of cottonwoods until they reached a peaceful clearing. A large, flat boulder overlooked a deep pool where the creek widened before continuing its journey downhill. Recognition dawned on Penelope instantly. This was their place, hers and Owen's, where they had spent countless summer afternoons swimming, talking, dreaming. And where, on her last day before leaving for Boston, 18-year-old Owen had kissed her for the first time and made an impulsive promise. I didn't think you'd remember this place, she said softly, dismounting. Owen tied their horses to a nearby tree and joined her by the boulder. How could I forget? We carved our initials here somewhere. His fingers traced the rough surface until he found the weathered markings, OW plus PW, enclosed in a crude heart. 17 seems a lifetime ago, Penelope murmured, running her fingertips over the carving. 5 years. Owen's voice was quiet. Sometimes it felt longer. A loaded silence hung between them, filled with unspoken questions and the weight of their shared past. Penelope had replayed their last day together countless times during her years in Boston, his declaration that he'd wait for her, her tearful promise to return someday. Their pledge sealed with an innocent kiss beside this very creek. But then had come years of increasingly infrequent letters, her father's insistence that she find a suitable husband in Boston, and eventually, her resignation that childhood dreams rarely survive the harsh light of adulthood. "Why did you really bring me here, Owen?" she finally asked, meeting his gaze directly. His blue eyes held hers steadily. "To remind you that some promises don't wash away, no matter how much time passes." Before she could respond, the distant sound of riders approaching broke the moment. Owen tensed, moving instinctively between Penelope and the direction of the noise. "Harrington's men," he muttered, recognizing the riders as they emerged from the trees. "3 of them." "What are they doing on my land?" Penelope asked, straightening her spine as the men approached. The leader, a bull-necked man with a pockmarked face, reined his horse to a stop several yards away. His companions flanked him, their expressions openly hostile. "Well, look what we have here," the leader drawled. "Young Wallace and the Winters girl, all grown up and back from the city." He touched the brim of his hat in a mocking gesture. "Name's Silas Tanner, madam, foreman for Mr. Harrington." "You're trespassing on Winters' property, Mr. Tanner," Penelope replied coolly. Tanner's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now that's where you're mistaken. According to Mr. Harrington's survey, this here creek marks the boundary, and we're just keeping to our side." He gestured vaguely toward the water. "Fact is, we've been mighty generous letting your cattle drink from our creek all these years." Owen's hand drifted closer to his sidearm. "That's a new interpretation of an old agreement, Tanner. John Winters and your boss settled this years ago." "Did they now? Funny how Mr. Harrington remembers it different." Tanner's gaze shifted back to Penelope. "Mr. Harrington sends his condolences for your loss, Miss Winters. He'd also like to extend his offer to purchase your property, save you the trouble of trying to run a failing ranch all by yourself." "The Winters ranch is not failing," Penelope countered, "and it's not for sale." Tanner shrugged. "Might want to reconsider, madam. Ranching's hard business for a woman alone. Accidents happen, stock goes missing, fires start." His tone remained conversational, but the threat was unmistakable. Owen took a step forward, tension radiating from his tall frame. "That sounded an awful lot like a threat, Tanner." The foreman's hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. "Just stating facts, Wallace. No need to get your dander up." His eyes narrowed. "Unless you're planning to fight her battles for her. Word is you've been spending an awful lot of time at the Winters place. People might start to talk." "People already talk," Owen replied evenly. "Doesn't make them right." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Tanner abruptly laughed and signaled his men to turn their horses. "Well, Miss Winters, we'll be on our way, but do think about Mr. Harrington's offer. He's not a patient man, and that offer won't stay open forever." As the 3 riders departed, Penelope released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Charming man." Owen's expression remained grim. "Tanner's dangerous. Mean streak a mile wide and completely loyal to Harrington." He turned to Penelope. "We should head back. I don't like the idea of them knowing you're out here with just me." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in thought about the confrontation. When they arrived, They found Olivia had prepared a hearty midday meal, and Billy was excitedly showing Josiah a repair he'd made to one of the corral gates. Over lunch, Owen explained the situation with the dam and Tanner's veiled threats. Josiah nodded grimly, unsurprised. "Harrington's been waiting for this chance," the older man confirmed. "Figured a city lady would rather take the money than fight." "He figured wrong," Penelope said firmly. After their meal, she excused herself to search her father's study for any documentation of the property boundaries. Hours later, as the sun began to set, Owen found her surrounded by maps, letters, and ledgers, her hair escaping its pins as she pored over the documents. "Any luck?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Penelope looked up, eyes bright with discovery. "Better than luck. I found the original agreement between my father and Harrington, signed and witnessed 12 years ago." She held up a yellowed document. "It clearly states that the entire creek, from its source to the fork where it joins the larger river, belongs to Winters' land." Owen crossed the room to examine the paper. "This could help, but Harrington will claim it's been superseded by newer arrangements." "Except my father kept meticulous records of every conversation and interaction," Penelope replied triumphantly. "There was never any renegotiation of the water rights. Harrington tried several times, but my father refused." She tapped another stack of papers. "It's all here." Owen's expression lightened. "That's something, at least, but paper won't stop Harrington from damming your creek." "No," Penelope agreed, "but it gives us legal standing if things escalate." She hesitated. "About tonight, I've already spoken with Josiah and Billy. They'll create a distraction at Harrington's south pasture while we dismantle the dam." Owen's tone was matter of fact. "Olivia's staying here with you until we return." "I'm coming with you," Penelope stated, rising from her chair. Owen blinked in surprise. "That's too dangerous, Penny." "It's my land, my water, and my fight," she countered. "I won't ask others to take risks I'm unwilling to take myself." Their gazes locked in silent battle until Owen finally shook his head with a reluctant smile. "Your father warned me you were stubborn. He should know. I inherited it from him." Penelope began gathering the most important documents to store safely. "We leave after dark," Owen nodded. "Josiah will move east with Billy around 9 o'clock. We'll head for the dam once we're sure Harrington's men are distracted." As night fell, Penelope changed into dark clothing and practical boots. She braided her hair tightly and tucked it under a hat borrowed from Billy. Olivia, who had initially protested the plan, eventually relented and helped prepare supplies they might need. "You always were the adventurous one," Olivia remarked as she packed tools into a saddlebag. "Even when we were children, you'd be the first to climb the tallest tree or swim to the deepest part of the creek." Penelope smiled at the memory. "Owen was usually right behind me." "Sometimes ahead of you," Olivia corrected with a knowing look. "That boy would have walked through fire for you, Penny." Before Penelope could respond, Owen entered the kitchen, dressed in dark clothing with a bandana ready to pull up over his face. "Josiah and Billy just left. We should head out in about 20 minutes." The plan was executed with precision. Under the cover of darkness, Penelope and Owen rode silently to the creek, while Josiah and Billy created a convincing distraction by stampeding a small group of cattle near Harrington's southern boundary. From their position at the dam, they could hear the distant commotion and saw lanterns moving as Harrington's men responded to the intrusion. "Now," Owen whispered, dismounting and tying their horses in a concealed spot. Working quickly by moonlight, they began dismantling the crude dam. Owen's strength made short work of the larger logs, while Penelope focused on clearing the smaller debris. The work was physically demanding, and soon they were both sweating despite the cool night air. "Last section," Owen murmured after nearly an hour of labor. He positioned himself to leverage a critical supporting log. "Once I pull this free, the water pressure should do the rest. Stand back." Penelope retreated to higher ground as Owen braced himself and pulled. With a groaning crack, the log came loose and water immediately began forcing its way through the gap. The pressure built rapidly, and within moments, the remainder of the dam gave way in a rush of freed water. "We did it," Penelope exclaimed, watching as the creek reclaimed its natural course. Owen grinned, his teeth white in the darkness. "They'll know it was deliberate. Let them. We have the documentation to prove it's our right." She impulsively grabbed his hand. "Thank you, Owen." He squeezed her fingers gently. "We should go before they realize what's happened." They rode back to the ranch at a careful pace, avoiding main trails and keeping to the shadows. The triumph of their successful mission created a bubble of shared exhilaration between them, bridging some of the distance that 5 years of separation had created. When they arrived back at the ranch, they found Olivia anxiously waiting on the porch. "Josiah and Billy returned safely about 10 minutes ago," she reported. "No one followed them." The 4 conspirators gathered around the kitchen table as Penelope brewed coffee, recounting their respective parts in the night's events. Laughter came easily as tension dissolved into relief and camaraderie. "Harrington won't take this lying down," Josiah warned eventually, sobering the mood. "He'll retaliate somehow." "Let him try," Billy said with youthful bravado. "We'll be ready." As the night deepened, Olivia and the 2 ranch hands retired, leaving Penelope and Owen alone at the kitchen table. The lamplight cast warm shadows across his features as he studied her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "You were magnificent tonight," he said quietly. Penelope felt a blush warm her cheeks. "I only did what needed doing." Not every woman would wade into a creek in the dark to tear down a dam while trespassing on a dangerous man's territory. Owen pointed out with a half-smile. "Perhaps I'm not every woman," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Something shifted in his expression. "You never were, Penny." He hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. "Do you ever think about that last day? Before you left for Boston?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with memory and unresolved feelings. Penelope could have deflected or changed the subject, but the night's adventure had awakened something in her, a courage that extended beyond physical feats to emotional honesty. "I thought about it every day for the first year," she admitted. "Then less often, but never completely forgotten." Owen's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I meant what I said that day. We were so young," Penelope whispered. "I'm not young anymore," he replied, his voice low and certain, "and neither are you." The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of horses approaching at speed. Owen was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "Riders. At least 4, maybe more." Penelope joined him, peering into the darkness. Lantern light revealed a group of mounted men approaching the ranch house, led by the unmistakable figure of Silas Tanner. "Get Josiah and Billy," she instructed, her mind racing. "I'll wake Olivia." Within minutes, the household was alert and prepared. Owen positioned Josiah and Billy at strategic points with rifles, while Olivia and Penelope remained inside, Olivia with a shotgun and Penelope with her father's revolver. The riders circled once before halting in front of the house. Tanner dismounted and strode confidently onto the porch. "Wallace," he bellowed, "I know you're in there. Come out and face me like a man." Owen exchanged glances with Penelope before moving to the door. "Stay back," he murmured, then stepped onto the porch, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. "It's the middle of the night, Tanner," Owen's voice carried clearly through the open door. "Decent folks are sleeping." "Cut the act," Tanner snarled. "Someone destroyed Mr. Harrington's water management system tonight. 3 guesses who, and the first 2 don't count." "Sounds like a problem between Harrington and whoever owns that creek," Owen replied evenly. "Maybe you should check property records before building on someone else's land." Tanner took a threatening step forward. "Mr. Harrington's mighty displeased, sent me to deliver a message." He glanced toward the house. To the Winters woman. Before Owen could respond, Penelope appeared in the doorway beside him. "I'm right here, Mr. Tanner. No need to shout." Tanner's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Harrington says his offer stands for 24 more hours. After that, it's withdrawn permanent-like, and he can't guarantee what might happen to folks who interfere with his business interests." "Is that a threat, Mr. Tanner?" Penelope asked calmly. "Call it friendly advice from a concerned neighbor," Tanner replied with a cold smile. "Ranching's dangerous work. Accidents happen, especially to those who don't know their place." Owen moved subtly, positioning himself more directly between Penelope and Tanner. "You've delivered your message. Now get off this property." Tanner's hand drifted toward his holster. "Or what, Wallace? You planning to take on all of us?" "He won't be alone," came Josiah's voice as he stepped from the shadows, rifle raised. Billy appeared on the other side of the house, similarly armed. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Tanner backed down with a forced laugh. "No need for bloodshed tonight, but remember what I said. 24 hours. He returned to his horse, mounting smoothly. "After that, all bets are off." The riders departed in a cloud of dust and pounding hooves, leaving the ranch in unsettled silence. "We need to prepare," Owen said grimly once they were alone again. "Harrington won't stop with threats." Dawn found them still awake, making preparations. Penelope sent Billy to town with messages for the sheriff and her father's lawyer, while Josiah rode to neighboring ranches to seek support. Owen dispatched one of his own ranch hands to bring additional men from the Wallace property. By midday, the Winters ranch had been transformed into a small fortress. 3 neighboring ranchers had arrived with hands of their own, all with grievances against Harrington's expanding influence in the territory. The sheriff, though skeptical, agreed to ride out later in the day to assess the situation. As the afternoon wore on, Penelope found herself alone with Owen near the corral, watching as men reinforced fences and positioned themselves at strategic points around the property. "I never intended to bring trouble to your doorstep," she said softly. Owen turned to her, his expression serious. "You didn't bring it. It was already here, waiting for someone to stand against it." He hesitated. "Penny, if things get ugly, don't," she interrupted. "We'll face whatever comes together." Something in her tone made him study her more closely. Together, Penelope met his gaze steadily. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about that day by the creek." She took a deep breath. "I came back to settle my father's affairs and save his ranch. I didn't expect to find feelings I thought were long buried." Owen moved closer, his voice low. "What kind of feelings?" "The kind that make me wonder what might have been if I'd never left," she admitted. "Or if I'd come back sooner." Before Owen could respond, a shout came from one of the lookouts. "Riders coming, at least 20 men." The moment shattered as they both rushed to positions. Through field glasses, they could see a large group approaching, led by a distinguished-looking man on a black stallion, Victor Harrington himself, accompanied by Tanner and a small army of cowboys. "This is bad," Josiah muttered as they gathered on the porch. "Harrington never does his own dirty work unless he means serious business." The sheriff's wagon appeared from the opposite direction, the lawman accompanied by 2 deputies. He intercepted Harrington's group before they reached the ranch house, creating a tense meeting in the central yard. Owen and Penelope moved forward to join them, keeping a cautious distance. Harrington, a silver-haired man with cold eyes and an expensive suit despite the rural setting, acknowledged their approach with a curt nod. "Miss Winters, I see you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest in your short time home." "Mr. Harrington," Penelope replied evenly, "I believe you've been misinformed about certain property boundaries." "Have I?" Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sheriff, I've brought documentation showing clearly that the disputed creek lies within my property lines." He handed over a rolled document. The sheriff, a balding man with a perpetually harassed expression, examined it briefly. "Looks official enough." "It's a forgery," Owen stated flatly. John Winters and Harrington signed an agreement 12 years ago establishing the creek as Winters' property. Convenient how young Wallace remembers documents that supposedly support his. "Friends claim," Harrington remarked, his implication clear. Penelope stepped forward. "I have the original agreement in my father's study, Sheriff. Signed, witnessed, and notarized in Silverton. I can fetch it if you'd like to compare." A murmur ran through the assembled men. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "That would be helpful, Miss Winters." As Penelope turned toward the house, Tanner made a subtle signal to one of Harrington's men, who began edging around the gathering. Owen noticed the movement and tracked the man's progress with narrowed eyes. Inside, Penelope quickly retrieved the document from her father's safe. As she was returning to the porch, she heard a commotion outside shouting, then the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. She burst outside to find chaos. One of Harrington's men lay on the ground clutching his arm while Owen stood over him, gun drawn. Tanner had his pistol aimed at Owen, while the sheriff was shouting for everyone to stand down. He was trying to reach the barn with a coal oil can, Owen explained tersely, planning to set a fire as a distraction. The wounded man's guilty expression confirmed the accusation, and the sheriff found the can where it had fallen. Harrington's face tightened with suppressed fury as his scheme unraveled. "Sheriff, I demand you arrest Wallace for shooting my man," Harrington blustered. "After you arrest his man for attempted arson," Penelope countered, descending the steps with the document in hand. "And perhaps we should discuss why you felt the need for such tactics if your claim is legitimate." The sheriff examined the document Penelope provided, comparing it to Harrington's version. Even to untrained eyes, the discrepancies were obvious. "Mr. Harrington," the sheriff said slowly, "this doesn't match your document, and Miss Winters' version has the Silverton courthouse seal." Harrington's confident facade cracked slightly. "That's an old agreement, superseded by more recent arrangements. My father kept records of every interaction with you," Penelope stated firmly. "There was never any renegotiation of water rights." "You've been trying to steal what isn't yours, Mr. Harrington, and now you've been caught." The gathered ranchers murmured in agreement, many having experienced Harrington's underhanded tactics themselves. The standoff might have escalated further, but at that moment, a rider approached at speed from the direction of town. It was the banker, Mr. Peterson, looking flustered and clutching a telegram. "Sheriff, Miss Winters," he called out as he dismounted. Important news from the territorial capital. All eyes turned to the newcomer as he caught his breath. "The governor has approved the railroad's proposed route through this region," Peterson announced. "They'll be purchasing right-of-way for tracks and a station." He looked directly at Harrington. "Your petition to have the route diverted through your northern property has been denied, Mr. Harrington." A ripple of understanding passed through the crowd. Harrington's sudden urgency to acquire the Winters property made perfect sense now he'd known the railroad was coming and wanted to control the valuable land. "Is that why you've been so determined to force me out?" Penelope asked Harrington directly. "For a railroad deal." Harrington's expression hardened. "Business is business, Miss Winters. Nothing personal." The sheriff looked between them, then made his decision. "Mr. Harrington, I'm going to have to ask you and your men to withdraw from Winters' property. These documents clearly support Miss Winters' claim to the creek." He nodded toward the wounded man. "And I'll be investigating this attempted arson." For a moment, it seemed Harrington might resist, but a calculating look crossed his face. "Very well, Sheriff, but this isn't over." He turned to Penelope. "The railroad will need that land, Miss Winters. They have ways of getting what they want with or without your cooperation." "Then they can negotiate with me directly," Penelope replied firmly, "without your interference." Harrington's eyes narrowed, but he signaled his men to retreat. As they departed, the tension slowly dissipated from the gathering. The sheriff approached Penelope and Owen. "You two stirred up quite the hornet's nest," he remarked, but there was a hint of approval in his tone. "Harrington's had free rein around here for too long. About time someone stood up to him." He tipped his hat. "I'll be in touch about formal statements regarding today's events." As the crowd dispersed, neighbors offering congratulations and support before departing, Penelope found herself once again alone with Owen near the corral. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as they watched the last visitors ride away. "So," Owen said quietly, "a railroad station on Winters' land. That changes things." Penelope nodded, considering the implications. It would mean prosperity for the ranch, security for the future. She turned to face him. "But I find I'm more concerned with another kind of future at the moment." Owen's expression softened. "What kind of future would that be?" "The kind we talked about once," she replied, her heart pounding. "By a creek 5 years ago." Something like hope kindled in Owen's blue eyes. "I seem to recall making you a promise that day." "You did," Penelope acknowledged, stepping closer to him. "Something about marrying someday." "I meant it then," Owen said, his voice low and certain. "I mean it still." The following morning dawned clear and bright. Penelope rose early, her heart light despite the exhaustion of recent days. The confrontation with Harrington had been resolved temporarily, though she harbored no illusions that the matter was permanently settled. Still, with the sheriff's support and documentation confirming her rights, she had breathing room to establish herself firmly on her father's land. As she stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee, she saw Owen riding up from the direction of his ranch. He dismounted gracefully, tying his horse to the hitching post before approaching with a sense of purpose that made her pulse quicken. "Good morning," she called, smiling as he climbed the steps to join her. "You're out early." "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, removing his hat. "Too much thinking to do." Penelope offered him her coffee, which he accepted gratefully. "What kind of thinking? About the future? About promises?" His eyes met hers over the rim of the cup. "About creeks." Something in his tone sent a flutter of anticipation through her. "Owen, come riding with me," he interrupted gently. "There's something I want to show you." Curiosity piqued, Penelope agreed. Within half an hour, they were riding side by side through the morning fresh landscape, dew still glistening on the grass. Owen led them along familiar trails until Penelope recognized their destination. They were heading toward their special place on Promise Creek. When they arrived at the clearing with its boulder and deep pool, Owen dismounted and helped Penelope down from her horse. The morning sun dappled the ground through the cottonwood leaves, creating a mosaic of light and shadow. "Why did you bring me here?" Penelope asked softly, though something in her heart already knew the answer. Owen took both her hands in his expression more open and vulnerable than she had seen since her return. 5 years ago, in this very spot, I made you a promise. We were young and maybe foolish, but my feelings were true." He swallowed visibly. "When you left for Boston, I told myself I'd wait for you to come back, that someday we'd stand here again and I'd ask you properly." Penelope felt tears gathering in her eyes as the memory of that day washed over her, their innocent declarations of love, his promise to wait, her tearful vow to return. "Every day you were gone, I'd ride out here sometimes," Owen continued, his voice rough with emotion, "just to remember to feel close to you somehow." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I've been carrying this for almost 3 years now." From the pouch, he produced a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "It was my grandmother's. I had it sized smaller, hoping." He met her gaze directly. "Penny, when you left, we swore we'd marry someday beside this creek. I've led you back here today because I believe that day has come." Penelope's heart soared as Owen lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Penelope Winters, I have loved you since we were children, though I didn't always know to call it love. These past days have shown me that the girl I adored has become a woman I admire, even more brave, determined, and true." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me, here beside Promise Creek where we always said we would?" Tears spilled freely down Penelope's cheeks as joy overwhelmed her. "Yes, Owen. Yes, I will marry you today, tomorrow, whenever you wish." Owen slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of years of separation, of dreams deferred but never abandoned, of a love that had endured distance and time. When they finally parted, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I was thinking we could be married right here beside the creek," he murmured. "Small ceremony, just family and close friends." "That sounds perfect," Penelope agreed, her heart too full for elaborate words. They returned to the ranch hand in hand, sharing their news first with Olivia, who embraced them both with tears and laughter, then with Josiah and Billy, who offered hearty congratulations. In the following weeks, as summer deepened across the Wyoming Territory, Penelope and Owen worked side by side to strengthen both their ranches. The railroad company approached with a fair offer for a right-of-way across a small portion of Winters' land, which Penelope negotiated skillfully, ensuring future prosperity without sacrificing the ranch's integrity. Harrington made no further direct moves against them, though his resentment simmered visibly whenever they encountered him in town. The attempted arson charge against his man had damaged his standing in the community, and other ranchers, emboldened by the Winters' success, began to challenge his more questionable practices. On a perfect August morning, with wildflowers blooming along the banks of Promise Creek, Penelope stood beside the boulder where young lovers had once carved their initials. She wore a simple white dress adorned with blue ribbons, her hair loose down her back with a crown of meadow flowers. Owen waited for her beside the minister, his expression one of wonder and devotion as she approached on Josiah's arm. Their vows were spoken with clear voices that carried across the water, witnessed by a small gathering of friends and neighbors. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen pulled Penelope close for a kiss that sealed their long-awaited promise, made beside the creek that had witnessed their journey from childhood friends to devoted partners. "Mrs. Wallace," Owen whispered against her ear as they turned to face their cheering friends. "Mr. Wallace," Penelope replied, her heart overflowing with joy. "It seems we kept our promise after all." As they walked hand in hand toward their future, Promise Creek continued its eternal journey, a testament to enduring commitment and promises fulfilled under the vast Wyoming sky.